Grettir'S SAGA Ásmundarsonar. Grettir's SAGA. Chapter 14 of Grettir as a child in his forward ways with his father. Ásmund the grey-haired kept house at Bjarg. Great and proud was his household, and many men he had about him, and was much beloved. These were the children of him and Asdis. Atli was the eldest son, a man yielding and soft-natured, easy and meek, and all men liked him well. Another son they had called Grettir. He was very forward in his childhood, a few words and rough, worrying both in word and deed. Little fondness he got from his father Ásmund, but his mother loved him very well. Grettir Ásmundarson was fair to look on, broad-faced, short-faced, red-haired, and much freckled, not of quick growth in his childhood. Thordis was a daughter of Ásmund, whom Glum, the son of Uspak, the son of Kjarlak of Skriðinsenni, afterwards had to be wife. Randvík was another daughter of Ásmund. She was the wife of Gamli, the son of Thorhall, the son of Vendlanda. They kept house at meals at Romfirth. Their son was Grim. The son of Glum and Thordis, the daughter of Ásmund, was Uspak, who quarrelled with Odd, the son of Ufe, as is told in the Bandamanna saga. Grettir grew up at Bjarg till he was 10 years old. Then he began to get on a little, but Ásmund bade him to do some work. Grettir answered that work was not right meat for him, but asked what he should do. Says Ásmund, "Thou shalt watch my home geese." Grettir answered and said, "A mean work, a milksop's work." Ásmund said, "Turn it well out of hand, and then matters shall get better between us." Then Grettir betook himself to watching the home geese. 50 of them there were, with many goslings. But no long time went by before he found them a troublesome drove, and the goslings slow-paced. Thereat he got some worried, for little did he keep his temper in hand. So some time after this, wayfaring men found the goslings strewn about dead, and the home geese broken-winged, and this was in autumn. Ásmund was mightily vexed hereat, and asked if Grettir had killed the fowl. He sneered mockingly and answered, "Surely as winter comes shall I twist the goslings' necks awry. If in like case are the geese, I have finished each of these." "Thou shalt kill them no more," said Ásmund. "Well, a friend should warn a friend of ill," said Grettir. "Another work shall be found for you then," said Ásmund. "More one knows, the more one tries," said Grettir. "And what shall I do now?" Ásmund answered, "Thou shalt rub my back at the fire, as I have been wont to have it done." "Hot for the hand truly," said Grettir, "but still a milksop's work." Now Grettir went on with this work for a while, but autumn came, and Ásmund became very faint of heart, and he spurs Grettir on to rub his back briskly. Now in those days there were wont to be large fire halls at the homesteads, wherein men sat at long fires in the evenings. Boards were set before the men there, and afterwards folk slept out sideways from the fires. There also women worked at the wool in the daytime. Now one evening, when Grettir had to rub Ásmund's back, the carle said, "Now thou wilt have to put away thy sloth, thou milksop." Says Grettir, "Ill is it to goad the foolhardy." Ásmund answers, "Thou wilt ever be a good for naught." Now Grettir sees where in one of the seats stood wool combs. One of these he caught up and let it go all down Ásmund's back. He sprang up and was mad, wroth thereat, and was going to smite Grettir with his staff, but he ran off. Then came the housewife and asked what this was between them. Then Grettir answered with this ditty: "This jewel-strewer, O ground of gold, his counsels I deem overbold. On both these hands that trouble so, our bitter pain will burn me now. Therefore with wool combs nails unshorn, somewhat ring strewer's back is torn, the hook claw bird that wrought his wound. Lo, now I see it on the ground. Hereupon was his mother sore vexed, that he should have taken to trick like this. She said he would never fail to be the most reckless of men. All this nowise battered matters between Ásmund and Grettir. Now some time after this, Ásmund had a talk with Grettir, that he should watch his horses. Grettir said this was more to his mind than the back rubbing. Then shalt thou do as I bid thee, said Ásmund. I have a dun mare which I called Kingala. She is so wise as to shifts of weather, thaws, and the like, that rough weather will never fail to follow, when she will go out on grazing. In such times thou shalt lock the horses up under cover, but keep them to grazing on the mountain neck yonder, when winter comes on. Now I shall deem it needful that thou turn this work out of hand better than two I have set to it already. Grettir answered, This is a cold work and a manly, but I deem it of trust in the mare, for I know none who has done it yet. Now Grettir took to the horse watching, and so the time went on till past Yule time. Then came on much cold weather with snow, that made grazing hard to come at. Now Grettir was ill-clad, and as yet little hardened, and he began to be starved by the cold. But Kingala grazed away in the windiest places she could find, let the weather be as rough as it would. Early as she might go to the pasture, never would she go back to the stable before nightfall. Now Grettir deemed that he must think of some scurvy trick or other, that Kingala might be paid in full for her way of grazing. So one morning early he comes to the horse stable, opens it, and finds Kingala standing all alone before the crib. For whatever food was given to the horses with her, it was her way to get it all for herself. Grettir got on her back and had a sharp knife in his hand, and drew it right across Kingala's shoulder, and then all along both sides of the back. Thereat the mare, being both fat and shy, gave a mad bound, and kicked so fiercely that her hooves clattered against the wall. Grettir fell off, but getting on his legs strove to mount her again. Now their struggle is of the sharpest, but the end of it is that he flays off the whole of the strip along the back to the loins. Thereafter he drove the horses out on grazing. Kingala would bite at her back, and when noon was barely past, she started off and ran back to the house. Grettir now locks the stable and goes home. Ásmund asked Grettir where the horses were. He said that he had stabled them as he was wont. Ásmund said that rough weather was like to be at hand, as the horses would not keep at their grazing in such good weather as now it was. Grettir said, Oft fail in wisdom folk of better trust. Now the night goes by, but no rough weather came on. Grettir drove off the horses, but Kingala cannot bear the grazing. This seemed strange to Ásmund, as the weather changed in no wise from what it had been theretofore. The third morning Ásmund went to the horses, and coming to Kingala said, I must needs deem these horses to be in sorry case. Good as the winter has been, but thy sides will scarce lack flesh, my dun. Things boded will happen, said Grettir, but so will things unboded. Ásmund stroked the back of the mare, and lo, the hide came off beneath his hand. He wondered how this could have happened, and said it was likely to be Grettir's doing. Grettir sneered mockingly, but said not. Now goodman Ásmund went home talking as one mad. He went straight to the fire hall, and as he came, heard the good wife say, It were good indeed if the horse keeping of my kinsman had gone off well. Then Ásmund sang the stave. Grettir has in such wise played, that Kingala has he flayed, whose trustiness would be my boast. Proudest women talk the most, so the cunning lad has wrought, thinking thereby to do naught of my biddings any more. In thy mind turn these words over. The housewife answered, I know not which is least to my mind, that thou should ever be bidding him work, or that he should turn out all work in one wise. That too we will make an end of, said Ásmund, but he shall fare the worse therefore. Then Grettir said, well, let neither make words about it to the other. So things went on a while, and Ásmund had King Karla killed, and many other scurvy tricks did Grettir in his childhood, whereof the story says not. But he grew great of body, though his strength was not well known, for he was unskilled in wrestling. He would make ditties and rhymes, but was somewhat scurrilous therein. He had no will to lie a night in the fire hall, and was mostly of few words. Chapter 15 of the Ball Play on Midfirth Water. At this time there were many growing up to be men in Midfirth. Skald Torfa dwelt at Torfa Stead in those days. Her son was called Bessi. He was the shapeliest of men and a good skald. At Meal lived two brothers, Cormac and Thorgils. With them a man called Aud was fostered, and was called the Foundling Skald. Once called Auden was growing up at Audenstead in Willowdale. He was a kind and good man to deal with, and the strongest in those parts, of all who were of our age with him. Calf Asgeirsson dwelt at Asgeirs River, and his brother Thorvald with him. Atli, also Grettir's brother, was growing into a ripe man at the time. The gentlest of men he was, and well beloved of all. Now these men settled to have ball play together on Midfirth Water. Thither came the Midfirthers and Willowdale men, and men from Westhope, and Waterness, and Ramfirth, but those who came from far abode at the play stead. Now those who were most even in strength were paired together, and thereat was always the greatest sport in autumn tide. But when he was 14 years old, Grettir went to the place, because he was prayed thereto by his brother Atli. Now were all paired off for the play, and Grettir was allotted to play against Audun, the aforenamed, who was some winters the eldest of the two. Audun struck the ball over Grettir's head, so that he could not catch it, and it bounded far away along the ice. Grettir got angry at that, deeming that Audun would outplay him. But he fetches the ball and brings it back, and when he was within reach of Audun, hurls it right against his forehead, and smites him so that the skin was broken. Then Audun struck at Grettir with the bat he held in his hand, but smote him no hard blow, for Grettir ran in under the stroke, and at that they seized one another with arms clasped and wrestled. Then all saw that Grettir was stronger than he had been taken to be, for Audun was a man full of strength. A long tug they had of it, but the end was that Grettir fell, and Audun thrust his knees against his belly and breast, and dealt hardly with him. Then Atli and Bessi and many others ran up and parted them, but Grettir said there was no need to hold him like a mad dog, for, said he, thralls wreak themselves at once, dastards never. This men suffered not to grow into open strife, for the brothers Calf and Thorvald were fain that all should be at one again, and Audun and Grettir were somewhat akin withal, so the play went on as before, nor did anything else befall to bring about strife. Chapter 16 of the Slaying of Skeggi. Now Thorkel Krafla got very old. He had the rule of Waterdale and was a great man. He was bosom friend of Ásmund the grey-haired, as was beseeming for the sake of their kinship. He was wont to ride to Bjarg every year and see his kin there. Nor did he fail herein the spring following these matters just told. Ásmund the Asdis welcomed him most heartily. He was there 3 nights, and many things did the kinsmen speak of between them. Now Thorkel asked Ásmund what his mind foreboded him about his sons, as to what kind of craft they would be likely to take. Ásmund said that he thought Atli would be a great man at farming, foreseeing and money-making. Thorkel answered, a useful man and like unto thyself. But what dost thou say of Grettir? Ásmund said, of him I say that he will be a strong man, and an unruly, and certes of a wrathful mood, and heavy enough he has seen been to me. Thorkel answered, that bodes no good, friend, but how shall we settle about our riding to the thing next summer? Ásmund answered, I am growing heavy for wayfaring, and would fain sin at home. Wouldst thou that Atli go in my stead, said Thorkill. I do not see how I could spare him, said Ásmund, because of the farm work and ingathering of household stores. But now Grettir will not work, yet he bears about that wit with him that I deem he will know how to keep up the showing forth of the law for me through thy aid. Well, thou shalt have thy will, said Thorkill, and withal he rode home when he was ready, and Ásmund let him go with good gifts. Some time after this, Thorkill made him ready to ride to the Thing. He rode with 60 men, for all went with him who were in his rule. Thus he came to Bjarg, and therefrom rode Grettir with him. Now they rode south over the heath that is called 2 days' ride, but on this mountain the baiting grounds were poor. Therefore they rode fast across it down to the settled lands, and when they came down to Fleet Tongue, they thought it was time to sleep. So they took the bridles off their horses and let them graze with the saddles on. They lay sleeping till far on in the day, and when they woke, the men went about looking for their horses. But they had gone each his own way, and some of them had been rolling, but Grettir was the last to find his horse. Now it was the wont in those days that men should carry their own victuals when they rode to the Althing, and most bore meal bags athwart their saddles, and the saddle was turned under the belly of Grettir's horse, and the meal bag was gone. So he goes and searches and finds nothing. Just then he sees a man running fast. Grettir asks who it is running there. The man answered that his name was Skeggi, and that he was a housecarl from the ridge in Waterdale. I am one of the following of Goodman Thorkill, he says, but faring heedlessly I have lost my meal bag. Grettir said, Odd haps or worst haps, for I also have lost the meal sack which I owned, and now let us search both together. This Skeggi liked well, and a while they go thus together, but all of a sudden Skeggi bounded off up along the moors and caught up a meal sack. Grettir saw him stoop, and asked what he took up there. My meal sack, says Skeggi. Who speaks to that besides thyself, says Grettir. Let me see it, for many a thing has its like. Skeggi said that no man should take from him what was his own, but Grettir caught at the meal bag, and now they tug one another along with the meal sack between them, both trying hard to get the best of it. It is so to be wondered at, says the housecarl, that ye Waterdale men should deem that because other men are not as wealthy as you, that you should have not therefore dare to hold aught of your own in despite. Grettir said that it had naught to do with the worth of men that each should have his own. Skeggi answers, Too far off is Auden now to throttle thee as at the ball play. Good, said Grettir, but whosoever that went, thou at last shall have never throttle me. Then Skeggi got at his axe and hewed at Grettir. When Grettir saw that, he caught the axe handle with the left hand bladeward of Skeggi's hand, so hard that straightway was the axe loosed from his hold. Then Grettir drave that same axe into his head so that it stood in his brain, and the housecarl fell dead to the earth. Then Grettir seized the meal bag and threw it across his saddle, and thereon rode after his fellows. Now Thorkill rode ahead of all, for he had no misgiving of such things befalling, but men missed Skeggi from the company, and when Grettir came up they asked him what they knew of Skeggi. Then he sang, A rock troll her weight did throw at Skeggi's throat a while ago. Over the battle ogress ran the red blood of the serving man. A deadly iron mouth did gape above him till clean out of shape. She tore his head and let out life, and certainly I saw their strife. Then Thorkill's men sprang up and said that surely trolls had not taken the man in broad daylight. Thorkill grew silent, but said presently, The matter is likely to be quite other than this. Methinks Grettir has in all likelihood killed him, or what else could befall. Then Grettir told all their strife. Thorkill says, This has come to pass most unluckily, for Skeggi was given to my following, and was natheless a man of good kin. But I shall deal with the matter. I shall give boot for the man as the doom goes, but the outlawry I may not settle. Now 2 things thou hast to choose between, Grettir, whether thou will rather go to the thing and risk the turn of matters, or go back home. Grettir chose to go to the thing, and then he went. But a lawsuit was set on foot by the heirs of the slain man. Thorkill gave handsel and paid up all fines, but Grettir must needs be outlawed and keep abroad 3 winters. Now when the chiefs rode from the thing, they baited under Sledge Hill before they parted. Then Grettir lifted a stone which now lies there in the grass, and it was called Grettir's Heave. But many men came up to see the stone, and found it a great wonder that so young a man should have aloft such a huge rock. Now Grettir rode home to Bjarg, and tells the tale of his journey. Ásmund let out little thereon, but said that he would turn out any unruly man. Chapter 17 of Grettir's Voyage Out. There was a man called Haflidi, who dwelt at Reyðarfell in White Riverside. He was a seafaring man, and had a sailing ship, which lay up White River. There was a man on board his ship, hight Bard, who had a wife with him young and fair. Ásmund sent a man to Haflidi, praying him to take Grettir and look after him. Haflidi said that he had heard that the man was ill-ruled of mood, yet for the sake of the friendship between him and Ásmund, he took Grettir to himself, and made ready for sailing abroad. Ásmund would give to his son no faring goods but victuals for the voyage and a little wadmal. Grettir prayed him for some weapon, but Ásmund answered, "Thou hast not been obedient to me, nor do I know how far thou art likely to work with weapons, things that may be of any gain, and no weapon shalt you have of me." "No deed, no reward," says Grettir. Then father and son parted with little love. Many there were who bade Grettir farewell, but few bade him come back. But his mother brought him on his road, and before they parted she spoke thus: "Thou art not fitted out from home, son, as I fain thou would, a man so well born as you, but meseems the greatest shortcoming here is that thou hast no weapons of any avail, and my mind misgives me that you will perchance need them sorely." With that she took out from under her cloak a sword well wrought, and a fair thing it was, and she said, "This sword was owned by Jokul, my father's father, and that earlier Waterdale men, and it gained them many a day. Now I give the sword to you, and may it stand thee in good stead." Grettir thanked her well for this gift, and said he deemed it better than things of more worth. Then he went on his way, and Asdis wished him all good hap. Now Grettir rode south over the heath, and made no stay till he came to the ship. Haflidi gave him a good welcome, and asked him for his faring goods. Then Grettir sang, "River of wind-driven steed, little gat I to my need, when I left my fair birthstead, from the snatchers of worm's bed. But this man's bane hanging here, gift of woman, good of cheer, proves the old saw said not ill, best to bairn is mother still." Haflidi said it was easily seen that she thought the most of him. But now they put to sea when they were ready, and had wind at will. But they had not gone out over all shallows, they hoisted sail. Now Grettir made a den for himself under the boat, from whence he would move for naught, neither for bailing, nor to aught the sail, nor to work at what he was bound to work at in the ship, even shares with the other men, neither would he buy himself off from the work. Now they sailed south by Reekness, then south from the land, and when they lost land they got much heavy sea. The ship was somewhat leaky, and scarce seaworthy in heavy weather, therefore they had it wet enough. Now Grettir let fly his biting rhymes, whereat the men got sore wroth. One day when it so happened that the weather was both squally and cold, the men called out to Grettir, and bade him now do manfully, for, said they, now our claws grow right cold. Grettir looked up and said, Good luck, scurvy starvelings, if I should behold each finger ye have doubled up with the cold. And no work they got out of him, and now it mislike them of their lot as much again as before, and they said that he should pay with his skin for his rhymes and the lawlessness which he did. Thou art more fain, said they, of playing with Bard the mate's wife than doing thy duty on board ship, and this is a thing not to be borne at all. The gale grew greater steadily, and now they stood bailing for days and nights together, and all swore to kill Grettir. But when Haflidi heard this, he went up to where Grettir lay, and said, Methinks the bargain between thee and the chapmen is scarcely fair. First thou dost buy them unlawfully, and thereafter thou castest the rhymes at them, and now they swear they will throw you overboard, and this is unseemly work to go on. Why should they not be free to do as they will, said Grettir, but I would that one or two of them tarry here behind with me, or ever I go overboard. Haflidi said, Such deeds are not to be done, and we shall never thrive if you rush into such madness, but I shall give thee good ready. What is that? Said Grettir. They blame thee for singing all things of them. Now therefore I would thou sing some scurvy rhyme to me, for then it might be that you would bear with thee the easier. To thee I never sing but good, said Grettir. I am not going to make thee like these starvelings. One may sing so, says Haflidi, that the lampoon be not so foul when it is searched into, though at first sight it not be over fair. I have ever plenty of that skill in me, says Grettir. Then Haflidi went to the men where they were bailing and said, Great is your toil, and no wonder that ye have taken ill liking to Grettir. But his lampoons we deem worse than all the rest together, they said. Haflidi said in a loud voice, He will surely fare ill for it in the end. But when Grettir heard Haflidi speak blamefully on him, he sang, Otherwise would matters be, when this shouting Haflidi ate in the house at Rheidafell, curdled milk and deemed it well. He who decks the reindeer's side, that twixt nest and nest doth glide, twice in one day had his fill of the feast of dart showers shrill. The shipmen thought this foul enough, and said he should not put shame on skipper Haflidi for naught. Then said Haflidi, Grettir is plentifully worthy that ye should do him some shame, but I will not have my honour staked against his ill will and recklessness. Nor is it good for us to wreak vengeance for this while we have this danger hanging over us. But be ye mindful of it when you land, if so it seem good to you. Well, they said, why should we not fare even as thou farest? For why should his vile word bite us more than thee? And in that mind Haflidi bade them abide, and thenceforward the chapmen made far less noise about Grettir's rhymes than before. Now a long and a hard voyage they had, and the leak gained on the ship, and men began to be exceedingly worn with toil. The young wife of the mate was wont to sew from Grettir's hands, and much would the crew mock him therefore. But Haflidi went up to where Grettir lay and sang, Grettir, stand up from thy grave, in the trough of the grey wave. The keel labours, tell my say, now unto thy merry way. From thy hands the linen clad, fill of sewing now has had. Till we make the land will she deem that labour fitteth thee. Then Grettir stood up and sang, Stand we up, for 'neath us now rides the black ship high now. This fair wife will like it ill, if my limbs are laid here still. Certes the white trothful one will not deem the deed well done, if the work that I should share other folk must ever bear. Then he ran aft to where they were bailing, and asked what they would have him do, and they said he'd do mighty little good. Well, said he, ye may yet be apaid of a man's aid. Haflidi bade them not to set aside his help, for maybe shall deem his hands freed if he offers his aid. At that time pumping was not used in ships that fared over the main. The manner of bailing they used men called tub or cask bailing, and a wet work it was and wearisome. 2 bailers were used, and one went down while the other came up. Now the chapman bade Grettir have the job of sinking the balers, and said that now it should be tried what he could do. He said that the less it was tried, the better it would be. But he goes down and sinks the balers, and now 2 were got to the bale against him. They held out but a little while before they were overcome with weariness, and then 4 came forward and soon fared in likewise. And so say some that 8 baled against him before the baling was done and the ship was made dry. Thenceforth the manner of the chapman's words to Grettir was much changed, for they saw what strength he had to fall back upon. From that time he was the stoutest and readiest to help wherever so need was. Now they bore off east into the main, and much thick weather they had, and one night unawares they ran suddenly on a rock, so that the nether part of the ship went from under her. Then the boat was run down, and women and all the loose goods were brought off. Nearby was a little holm, whither they brought their matters, as they best could in the night. But when it began to dawn, they had a talk as to where they were come. Then they who had fared between lands before knew the land for South Mere in Norway. There was an island hard by called Hramsi. Many folk dwelt there, and therein too was the manor of a lord. Chapter 18 of Grettir at Hramsi and his dealings with Karl the Old. Now the lord who dwelt in the island was called Thorfinn. He was the son of Karl the Old, who had dwelt there long, and Thorfinn was a great chief. But when day was fully come, men saw from the island that the chapmen were brought to great straits. This was made known to Thorfinn, and he quickly bestirred himself, and had a large bark of his launched, rowed by 16 men. On this bark were nigh 30 men in all. They came up speedily and saved the chapmen's wares. But the ship settled down, and much goods were lost there. Thorfinn brought all men from the ship home to himself, and they abode there a week and tried their wares. Then the chapmen went south into the land, and are now out of the tale. Grettir was left behind with Thorfinn, and little he stirred, and was at most times mighty short of speech. Thorfinn bade give him meals, but otherwise paid small heed to him. Grettir was loath to follow him, and would not go out with him in the day. This Thorfinn took ill, but had not the heart to have food withheld from him. Now Thorfinn was fond of stately housekeeping, and was a man of great joyance, and would fain have other men merry too. But Grettir would walk about from house to house, and often went into other farms about the island. There was a man called Audun, who dwelt at Windham. Thither Grettir went every day, and he made friends with Audun. And there he was wont to sit still for hour on the day. Now one night very late, as Grettir made ready to go home, he saw a great fire burst out on a nest to the north of Audun's farm. Grettir asked what new thing this might be. Audun said that he need be in no haste to know that. It would be said, said Grettir, if that were seen in our land, that the flame burned above hid treasure. The farmer said, that fire I deem to be ruled over by one into whose matters it avails little to pry. Yet fain would I know thereof, said Grettir. On that nest, said Audun, stands a barrow, great and strong, wherein was laid Karl the Old, Thorfinn's father. At first father and son had one farm in the island, but since Karl died, he has so haunted this place that he has swept away all farmers who owned lands here, so that now Thorfinn holds the whole island. But whatsoever man Thorfinn holds his hand over gets no scathe. Grettir said that he had told this tale well, and, says he, I shall come here tomorrow, and then thou shalt have digging tools ready. Now I pray thee, says Audun, to do naught herein, for I know that Thorfinn will cast his hatred on thee therefore. Grettir said he would risk that. So the night went by, and Grettir came early on the morrow, and the digging tools were ready. The farmer goes with him to the barrow, and Grettir brake it open, and was rough-handed enough thereat, and did not leave off till he came to the rafters, and by then the day was spent. Then he tore away the rafters, and now Auden prayed him hard not to go into the barrow. Grettir bade him guard the rope, but I shall espy what dwells within here. Then Grettir entered into the barrow, and right dark it was, and the smell there was therein none of the sweetest. Now he groped about to see how things were below. First he found horse bones, then he stumbled against the arm of a high chair, and in that chair found a man sitting. Great treasures of gold and silver were heaped together there, and a small chest was set under the feet of him full of silver. All these riches Grettir carried together to the rope, but as he went out through the barrow he was griped at right strongly. Thereon he let go the treasure and rushed against the barrow dweller, and now they set on one another unsparingly enough. Everything in their way was kicked out of place, the barrow white setting on with hideous eagerness. Grettir gave back before long time, till at last came to this, that he saw it would not do to hoard his strength any more. Now neither spared the other, and they were brought to where the horse bones were, and thereabout they wrestled long. And now one, now the other fell on his knee. But the end of the strife was that the barrow dweller fell over on his back with huge din. Then ran Auden from the holding of the rope, and deemed Grettir dead. But Grettir drew the sword, Jökull's gift, and drave it into the neck of the barrow bidder so that it took off his head, and Grettir laid it at the thigh of him. Then he went to the rope with the treasure, and lo, Auden was clean gone, so he had to get up the rope by his hands. He had tied a line to the treasure, and therewith he now haled it up. Grettir had got very stiff with his dealings with Carr, and now he went back to Thorfinn's house with the treasures, when as all folk had set them down to table. Thorfinn gave Grettir a sharp look when he came into the drinking hall, and asked him what work he had on hand so needful to do that he might not keep times of meals with other men. Grettir answers, many little matters will hap on late eves, and therewith he cast down on the table all the treasure he had taken in the barrow. But in one matter there was thereof, on which he must needs keep his eyes. This was a short sword, so good a weapon, that a better he said he had never seen, and this he gave up the last of all. Thorfinn was blithe to see that sword, for it was an heirloom of his house, and had never yet gone out of his kin. Whence came these treasures to thine hand? Said Thorfinn. Grettir sang, Lessener of the flame of sea, my strong hope was true to me, when I deemed the treasure lay in the barrow from today. Folk shall know that I was right, the begetters of the fight. Small joy now shall have therein, seeking dragon's lair to win. Thorfinn answered, Blood will seldom seem blood to thine eyes. No matter before thee has had will to break open the barrow, but because I know that what wealth soever is hid in earth or borne into barrow is wrongly placed, I shall not hold thee blameworthy for thy deed, as thou hast brought it all to me. Yea, or whence did thou get the good sword? Grettir answered and sang, Lessener of waves flashing flame, to my lucky hand this came. In the barrow where that thing through the dark fell clattering, if that helm fire I should gain, made so fair to be the bane of the breakers of the bow, never from my hand should it go. Thorfinn said, Well hast thou prayed for it, but thou must show some deed of fame before I give thee that sword, for never could I get it from my own father while he lived. Said Grettir, Who knows to whom most gain will come of it in the end? So Thorfinn took the treasures and kept the sword at his bedhead, and the winter wore on toward Yule, so that little else fell out to be told of. Chapter 19 of Yule at Haramsi, and how Grettir dealt with the berserks. Now the summer before these things, Earl Eirikr Magnusson made ready to go from his land west to England to see King Canute the Mighty, his brother-in-law, but left behind him in the rule of Norway Hakon, his son, and gave him into the hands of Earl Svein, his brother, for the watching and warding of his realm, for Hakon was a child in years. But before Earl Eirikr went away from the land, he called together lords and rich bonders, and many things they spoke on laws and the rules of the land, for Earl Eirikr was a man good at rule. Now men thought it an exceedingly ill fashion in the land that renegades or berserks called to holm high-born men for their fee or womankind in such wise that whosoever should fall before the other should lie unatoned. Hereof many got both shame and loss of goods, and some lost their lives withal. And therefore Earl Eirikr did away with all holm gangs and outlawed all berserks who fared with raids and riots. In the making of this law, the chief of all with Earl Eirikr was Thorfinn Karlsson from Horamsi, for he was a wise man and a dear friend of the earl's. 2 brothers are named as being of the worst in these matters. One hight Thorir Ponch, the other Ogmund the Evil. They were of Hålogaland kin, bigger and stronger than other men. They wrought the berserks' gang and spared nothing in their fury. They would take away the wives of men and hold them for a week or a half-month, and then bring them back to their husbands. They robbed wheresoever they came, or did some other ill deeds. Now Earl Eirikr made them outlaws through the length and breadth of Norway. And Thorfinn was the eagerest of men in bringing about their outlawry, therefore they deemed that they owed him ill will. So the Earl went away from the land, as is said in his saga, but Earl Svein bore away over Norway. Thorfinn went home to his house, and sat at home till just up to Yule, as is aforesaid, but at Yule he made ready to go to his farm called Slisfirth, which is on the mainland, and thither he had bidden many of his friends. Thorfinn's wife could not go with her husband, for her daughter of ripe years lay ill abed, so they both abode at home. Grettir was at home too, and 8 housecarls. Now Thorfinn went with 30 freedmen to the Yule feast, whereat there was the greatest mirth and joyance among men. Now Yule Eve comes on, and the weather was bright and calm. Grettir was mostly abroad this day, and saw how ships fared north and south along the land, for each one sought the other's home where the Yule drinking was settled to come off. By this time the good man's daughter was so much better that she could walk about with her mother, and thus the day wore on. Now Grettir sees how a ship rose up toward the island. It was not right big, but shield hung it was from stem to stern, and stained all above the sea. These folk rowed smartly and made for the boat stands of goodman Thorfinn, and when the keel took land, those who were therein sprang overboard. Grettir cast up the number of the men, and they were 12 altogether. He deemed their guise to be far from peaceful. They took up their ship and bore it up from the sea. Thereafter they ran up to the boat stand, and therein was that big boat of Thorfinn, which was never launched to sea by less than 30 men. But these 12 shot it in one haul down to the shingle of the foreshore, and thereon they took up their own bark and bore it into the boat stand. Now Grettir thought that he could see clear enough that they would make themselves at home, but he goes down to meet them, and welcomes them merrily, and asks who they were and what their leader was hight. He to whom these words were spoken answered quickly, and said that his name was Thorir, and that he was called Ponch, and that his brother was Ogmund, and that the others were fellows of theirs. I deem, said Thorir, that thy master Thorfinn has heard tell of us. Is he perchance at home? Grettir answered, Lucky men are ye, and hither have come in a good hour, if ye are the men I take you to be. The goodman is gone away with all his home folk who are free men, and will not be home again till after Yule. But the mistress is at home, and so is the good man's daughter, and if I thought that I had some ill will to pay back, I should have chosen above all things to have come just thus, for here are all the matters in plenty whereof ye stand in need, both beer and all other good things. Thorir held his peace, while Grettir let this tale run on. Then he said to Ogmund, "How far have things come to pass other than as I guessed? And now am I well enough minded to take revenge on Thorfinn for having made us outlaws. And this man is ready enough of tidings, and no need have we to drag the words out of him." "Words all may use freely," said Grettir, "and I shall give you such cheer as I may, and now come home with me." They bade have him thanks thereof, and said they would take his offer. But when they came home to the farm, Grettir took Thorir by the hand and led him into the hall. And now was Grettir mightily full of words. The mistress was in the hall, and had had it decked with hangings, and made all fair and seemly. But when she heard Grettir's talk, she stood still on the floor, and asked whom he welcomed in that earnest wise. He answered, "Now, mistress, is it right meet to welcome these guests merrily, for here is come goodman Thorir Paunch, and the whole 12 of them, and are minded to sit here Yule over, and a right good hap it is, for we were few enough before." She answered, "Am I to number these among bonders and good men, who are the worst of robbers and ill-doers? A large share of my goods had I given that they had not come here at this time, and ill dost thou reward Thorfinn, for that he took thee a needy man from shipwreck, and has held thee enough the winter as a free man." Grettir said, "It would be better to take the wet clothes off these guests than to scold at me, since for thou mayst have long time enough." Then said Thorir, "Be not cross-grained, mistress. Not shall thou miss thy husband's being away, for a man shall be got in his place for thee, yea, and for thy daughter a man, and for each of the home women." "That is spoken like a man," said Grettir, nor will they thus have any cause to bewail their lot. Now all the women rushed forth from the hall, smitten with huge dread and weeping. Then said Grettir to the berserks, "Give into my hands what it pleases you to lay aside of weapons and wet clothes, for the folk will not be yielding to us while they are scared." Thorir said he heeded out how women might squeal, but said, "Thee indeed we may set apart from the other home folk, and methinks we may well make thee our man of trust." "So to that yourself," said Grettir, "but certain I do not take to all men alike." Thereupon they laid aside the more part of their weapons, and thereafter Grettir said, "Methinks it is a good rede now that ye sit down to table and drink somewhat, for it is right likely that ye are thirsty after the rowing." They said they were ready enough for that, but knew not where to find out the cellar. Grettir asked if they would that he should see for things and go about for them. The berserks said they would be right fain of that, so Grettir fetched beer and gave them to drink. They were mightily weary and drank in huge draughts, and still he let them have the strongest beer there was, and this went on for a long time, and meanwhile he told them many merry tales. From all this there was din enough to be heard among them, and the home folk were no wise fain to come to them. Now Thorir said, "Never yet did I meet a man unknown to me who would do us such good deeds as this man. Now what reward wilt thou take for us thy work?" Grettir answered, "As yet I look to no reward for this, but if we be even such friends when you go away, as it looks like we shall be, I am minded to join fellowship with you, and though I be of less might than some of you, yet shall I not let any men of big reeds." Hereat they were all well pleased, and would settle the fellowship with vows. Grettir said that this might should do, for true is the old saw, ale is another man, nor shall ye settle this in haste any further than as I have said, for on both sides are we men little meet to rule our tempers. They said that they would not undo what they had said, With all the evening wore on till it grew quite dark. Then sees Grettir that they were getting very heavy with drink, so he said, "Do ye not find it time to go to sleep?" Thorir said, "Time enough forsooth, and sure shall I be to keep to what I have promised the mistress." Then Grettir went forth from the hall and cried out loudly, "Go ye to your beds, women all, for so is goodman Thorir pleased to bid." They cursed him for this, and to hear them was like hearkening to the noise of many wolves. Now the berserks came forth from the hall, and Grettir said, "Let us go out, and I will show you Thorfinn's cloth bower." They were willing to be led there, so they came to an outbower exceeding great. A door there was to it, and a strong lock thereon, and the storehouse was very strong withal. There too was a closet good and great, and a shield panelling between the chambers. Both chambers stood high, and men went up by steps to them. Now the berserks got riotous and pushed Grettir about, and he kept tumbling away from them, and when they least thought thereof, he slipped quickly out of the bower, seized the latch, and slammed the door to, and put the bolt on. Thorir and his fellows thought at first that the door must have got locked of itself, and paid no heed thereto. They had light with them, for Grettir had showed them many choice things which Thorfinn owned, and these they now noted awhile. Meantime Grettir made all the speed home to the farm, and when he came in at the door he called out loudly, and asked where the good wife was. She held her peace, for she did not dare to answer. He said, "Here is somewhat of a chance of a good catch, but are there any weapons available here?" She answers, "Weapons there are, but how they may avail thee I know not. Let us talk thereof anon," says he, "but now let every man do his best, for later on no chance better still shall there be." The good wife said, "Now God were in Garth if our lot might better. Over Thorfinn's bed hangs the barbed spear, the big one that was owned by Carr the Old. There too is a helmet and a byrnie, and the short sword, the good one, and the arms will not fail if thine heart does well." Grettir seizes the helmet and spear, girds himself with the short sword, and rushed out swiftly, and the mistress called upon the housecarls, bidding them follow such a dauntless man. 4 of them rushed forth and seized their weapons, but the other 4 durst come nowhere nigh. Now it is to be said of the berserks that they thought Grettir delayed his coming back strangely, and now they began to doubt if there were not some guile in the matter. They rushed against the door and found it was locked, and now they tried the timber walls so that every beam creaked again. At last they brought things so far that they broke down the shield paneling and got into the passage, and thence out to the steps. Now berserks' gang seized them, and they howled like dogs. In that very nick of time Grettir came up and with both hands thrust his spear at the midst of Thorir, as he was about to get down the steps, so that it went through him at once. Now the spearhead was both long and broad, and Ogmund the Evil ran onto Thorir and pushed him onto Grettir's thrust, so that all went up to the barb's end, and the spear stood out through Thorir's back and into Ogmund's breast, and they both tumbled dead off the spear. Then of the others each rushed down the steps as he came forth. Grettir set on each of them, and in turn hewed with the sword, or thrust with the spear, but they defended themselves with logs that lay on the green, and whatso thing they could lay hands on. Therefore the greatest danger was to deal with them, because of their strength, even though they were weaponless. 2 of the Hålogalanders Grettir slew on the green, and then came up the housecarls. They could not come to one mind as to what weapons each should have. Now they set on whenever the berserks caved back, but when they turned about on them, then the housecarls slunk away up the houses. 6 Vikings fell there, and of all them was Grettir the bane. Then the 6 others got off and came down to the boat stand, and so into it, and thence they defended themselves with oars. Grettir now got great blows from them, so that at all times he ran the risk of much hurt. But the housecarls went home, and had much to say of their stout onset. The mistress bade them espy what became of Grettir, but that was not to be got out of them. 2 more of the berserks Grettir slew in the boat stand, but 4 slipped out by him, and by this dark night had come on, 2 of them ran into a corn barn at the farm of Windham, which is aforenamed. Here they fought for a long time, but at last Grettir killed them both. Then was he beyond measure weary and stiff. The night was far gone, and the weather got very cold with the drift of snow. He was fain to leave the search of the 2 Vikings who were left now, so he walked home to the farm. The mistress had lights lighted in the highest lofts of the windows that they might guide him on his way, and so it was that he found his road homeward as he saw the light. But when he came unto the door, the mistress went up to him and bade him welcome. Now, she said, thou hast reaped great glory, and freed me and my house from a shame of which we should never have been healed, but if thou hadst saved us. Grettir answered, methinks I am much the same as I was this evening when thou didst cast ill words on me. The mistress answered, we wotted not thou wert a man of such prowess as we have now proved thee. Now shall all things in the house be at thy will which I may bestow on thee, and which it may be seeming for thee to take, but methinks that Thorfinn will reward thee better still when he comes home. Grettir answered, little of reward will be needed now, but I keep thine offer till the coming of thy master, and I have some hope now that you will sleep in peace as for the berserks. Grettir drank little that evening and lay with his weapons about him through the night. In the morning, when it began dawn, people were summoned together throughout the island, and a search was set on foot for the berserks who had escaped the night before. They were found far on in the day under a rock, and were by then dead from cold and wounds. Then they were brought unto a tide-washed heap of stones and buried thereunder. After that folk went home, and the men of that island deemed themselves brought unto fair peace. Now when Grettir came back to the mistress, he sang this stave. By the sea's wash have we made graves where 12 spear groves are laid. I alone such speedy end unto all these folks did send. O fair giver forth of gold, whereof can great words be told? Midst the deed one man has wrought, if this deed should come to naught. The good wife said, surely thou art like unto every very few men who are now living on this earth. So she set him in the high seat, and all things she did well to him, and now time wore on till Thorfinn's coming home was looked for.